Gretchen Gentili Simpson is a 38-year-old woman, a wife, a mother, and a truck driver.
Amusing incident that happened when I was driving up Broad Street recently was a great big truck pulled up beside me, and the driver was from out of the city, and he yelled over, "Hey, Mac, can you tell me where Callowhill Street is?" And I turned to look at him, and he got really flustered. He says, "Oh, I mean, ma'am," you know, and I told him where the street was that he was looking for, but it was just an amusing situation because he assumed that he was yelling over to a local truck driver. And when he saw that it was a woman, he just was flustered for a minute.
We moved from Albany, New York, and I had been teaching and directing daycare centers, and I was really ready to look into some other kind of work. First of all, I know the teaching situation is tight. And I saw an ad that said, "Women interested in non-traditional jobs, call." And when I explained what I was interested in and my physical capabilities, she said, "Oh, you're just the kind of women we're looking for." And the fact that I drive stick shift and have for years and years gave me a good foothold for the UPS job, United Parcel Service. But I've always been an athletic, outdoorsy kind of person, and everything about working in a labor job where you sweat and work, and it just rung right. My husband has a white-collar job that pays very, very minimally, and beside the financial need for two incomes, I have an emotional need. I found that during the time when I wasn't working, when the children were real young, I was almost a basket case, not knowing that I had a certain amount of money that I could spend on whatever needs arose. When I interviewed, they would ask about my background, and even though I didn't fudge about any of the teaching experience in the background that I had, I always pointed out the things that I had done that required heavy work, like moving in a U-Haul recently and packing furniture. You know, I used the things that I had done that had required physical strength and sort of played down the desk and the indoor kinds of jobs that I had also had. Because being almost 40, at first I thought, you know, people hiring for outdoor hard labor jobs would just assume that, you know, I was too old. A woman and almost 40, you know, I figured were two factors that were against me. But my whole psychic energy right now is geared toward, you know, using the strength that I have. I was a little uneasy the first couple of days on this job whether I could do it or not. I said something to my sister at one point, and she said, "Just do the job. You don't have to prove to anybody that women can do this job. You just are doing the job for yourself." And that's exactly why I'm working, because it's a job that I enjoy, that I can do, and I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just earning a living. One of the situations that I had to deal with was a huge pothole right beside the curb. And it is possible for a truck to get stuck in that pothole. And then I kept thinking it was going to happen to me. And everyone would see this truck wheel down into this pothole, and you'd have to get towed out because you couldn't get out on your own. And I kept thinking, if I do that, everyone's going to say, "Oh, yeah, that's a woman driver, and she got stuck in that pothole." And then I found out from some of the other drivers that it has happened. Thank goodness it's never happened to me, but it has happened to several of the drivers. And then that kind of freed me up of not being so nervous that if I did it, it would be a unique situation. I mean, it happens to men too, so I just continue driving and look out for the potholes and try not to get stuck, but I don't worry so much about putting women in an unfavorable light. Generally, I get into work by 8 o'clock, so I have time to have a cup of coffee. But the first few times I went into the cafeteria, I felt very uneasy because all the women clerical workers sit in one section of the cafeteria and the men drivers sit in another section. At first, I didn't know whether to sit with the women or to sit with the drivers. So I'd sit with the women 1 or 2 days, and then I sat by myself 1 or 2 days, and finally I realized I wanted to associate with the drivers, but I didn't want to impose upon their conversations. So after sitting with the drivers for a few days and realizing that they were not really antagonistic that I was there, but not really accepting either, then one time I said to them, "Look,
I know when I sit down with you guys, it changes the whole tone of your conversation, but if I sit with the women, you think,
What's the matter with her? She thinks she's too good for us?
and once I verbalized the uneasiness about where I fit in, I think it made things a lot easier.
It could add extra strain on me while I'm working if I was constantly aware of, I'm a woman doing a job that has always been done by a man. But when I'm out there doing that job, I don't allow myself to dwell on what people might be thinking. One of the men's store owners that I deliver to said to me, when you're doing this job, doesn't that mean that some man isn't getting hired for the job? And I said, I have a family to support, I need the job, and I can do the job. And men can apply for the job also. One of the storekeepers on Walnut Street asked me one day last week if I was married. And I said, yeah, I've been married 16 years. And he said, oh, well, I'm looking for a wife that'll support me, and you sure are hardworking. I've heard some snide comments. Oh, there's one of those liberated women. What's she doing a man's job for? What does she think she is, a man? But there's no time to react. And, you know, I just keep doing my job. I get such mixed reactions. Women stop me on the street saying, right on, sister, it's good to see someone doing that kind of work. So that the things that I come home and talk to my family about are the positive things, the things that I enjoy. My two sons think it's really super great. My daughter, who is 12, had a little bit of trouble at first coming to grips with my mother, the truck driver, but she understands it and, you know, appreciates the fact that I'm doing it and the fact that, you know, there's more money coming in right now than there would be if I weren't doing this job. My husband, it's not the image that his family or he has ever had of what his wife does, but he's able to cope with it and just kind of go with it.
John knows that it's important to me to do this kind of work, and he's been very supportive and very helpful. John has been able to adapt his schedule to meet the needs of the family while I'm working a 12 or 14-hour day. So it hasn't been as difficult for me as it would be, you know, if he weren't able and willing to adapt in that way.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed cooking. I have more time I spend with the kids. I've gotten to know them, and I think they've gotten to know me better. And that's one of the positive benefits that's happened thus far.
Greta and John have a good relationship now, but there were some difficulties in the past. When they first married, Greta identified with her husband's career. Then she started reading the literature of the women's movement and became aware, as she says, of her own personhood. This put a strain on the marriage, and the communication broke down, so she and John separated for a short time. They reunited and are both adjusted and happy with the changes.
There's another benefit now, however, and that is that I have a lot of freedom. What I mean by that, I feel a lot of stress sometimes at work. And I know that if the stress becomes more than I can cope with, the kids won't go hungry, the mortgage payments will be made, because Gret can do that. That gives me more chance to really be into the job, to kind of flow with it.
When you're out on the job, you have a whole truck full of parcels, and you want to get them all delivered and make your pickups so that you have a full truck when you go back in. It's such a clear-cut kind of a job. Other jobs I've had have been so undefined, and working with kids, you don't really see the results of what you're doing. But when you're driving a delivery car and you have to deliver those packages, you know when you're getting them done. Like when I was teaching, I would get home and I would be carrying, either physically carrying my paperwork home or carrying my mental overload from the day's job. Whereas with this job, I get home and I'm tired, but I have no baggage, no emotional baggage. I just bring myself home.
Gret's raised consciousness leads her to want more for her husband, so he won't be bound by a stereotyped sex role.
For a number of years, I was home with raising small children, and I had a lot of freedom at that time to pursue some of my own interests in music and to do a lot of reading. And it has occurred to me recently that my husband should be entitled to that same kind of freedom now that the children are in school all day and I am working and making a good salary, that it would be very helpful for him to have
time off to just pursue some of his own interests and just do some of the things that he would like to do rather than the things he feels he ought to do.